Perfect. Okay, I'm going to start. Hello to all of our audience in Tehran and other places in the world. It is with great pleasure to introduce architect Anne Holtrop to you. I must confess that Anne holds a special place in my heart as one of my favorite contemporary architects, as an immense inspiration, not only to me, but I think a big generation of architects from my generation. So it's a very great opportunity to us, and we're so happy to have Anna here. I'm going to give you a brief biography, introduction, and then we can start to listen to Anna's lecture. So perhaps while I'm speaking, if you don't mind, maybe you can admit the people. Sorry, all the logistic difficulties.
Yes.
Sorry about that. Okay. So I'm going to share again. So Anna is born in 1977, as it says on the website that he checked. So he studied architecture in Bouwkunst in Amsterdam, and I believe later in the AA in London. And then he started his studio in 2009, his own studio. He's based in Mahrak, Bahrain, and also Amsterdam, the Netherlands. In 2015, his two first major projects came to work, Museum for Vechten, and also the National Pavilion of the Kingdom of Bahrain. They were completed. He teaches at Sandberg Institute in Amsterdam, and he was editor of architectural journal Oase from 2005 to 2013. So for his practice, he has been awarded numerous awards and grants from Mondrian Fund, as well as Charlotte Kohler Prize for Architecture from Prince Bernhard Cultuurfonds in 2007. He's been also teaching at prestigious universities in Switzerland, like the Academy of Architecture, and also ETH Institute in Zurich. So let me say this in Farsi and I'll continue. خب باعث خوشحالیه که امروز آن هولتروپ رو داشته باشیم، معمار هلندی که به نظر من از معمارای بسیار تاثیرگذار معاصر در زمان ما. ایشون متولد سال 1977 در هلند و انگلیس معماری خوندن و 2009 استودیو خودشون رو انداختن و دو تا دفتر دارن، هم در محرق در بحرین و هم در آمستردام هلند. اولین ساختمانشون در سال 2015 تکمیل شد. موزه فختن در هلند و همینطور غرفه ملی پادشاهی بحرین هستش و همینطور در مؤسسات مختلفی تدریس میکنه، از مؤسسه سندبرگ تا دانشگاه ETH در زوریخ و همینطور آکادمی منریزی و همینطور جوایز متعددی رو دریافت کردن. So Anna's work perfectly somehow aligns with the theme of our lecture series here, which is called Contemporary Architecture Between Terrestriality and Transcendence, where we delve into the interplay between form and matter. So on the one hand, in what I call formal matter, material is adapted to a transcendent, almost Platonic form, where we see on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, we have material form, where the overall form of the project or the work is driven by material properties. So in Anna's work, we also, I think, witness these dialectics between materials that are ordered by geometry in ideal state, what we see in the left-hand side, prefabricated concrete with very precise geometry, and on the other hand, to the right-hand side, you see a more free, impure, maybe even prehistoric or primitive or archaic architecture we see in concrete, cast in place, cast in stand, I believe, concrete. And the binary between the two is quite fascinating. It's very close to what we talked about in this lecture series. And we can track this back to his other work, the art pieces that he has, where we have the sense of materiality is strong in both, but on the left-hand side, we have the geometry that is ruling the matter, and on the right hand side the matter is more free and we have a more indeterminate form. Let me say this in Farsi, please. ما تو کار آنه میبینیم این تقابل بین فرم و متریال رو، نکته‌ای که تم لکچر سری ما هم هستش، جایی که از طرفی این فرم هست که بر مصالح بسیار غالبه و داره اونا رو شکل میده، و در سمت دیگه جایی هست که ما داریم از مصالح بیشتر فرم رو میگیریم و فرم دقیقی نداریم. در واقع یک جور برتری اکسپرشن مصالح هست. Anna has written and conducted design studios around the notion of what he calls material gestures. So he has written about this notion, and he mentions that unique gestures dictated by a particular material and the specialisms of working that material. So I think this is quite close to what I describe here as material form. And taking this to the semiotic score that we use to locate projects in our lecture series, we can witness this interplay. Our horizontal x-axis is showing materiality from a very terrestrial, very natural expression to a very transcendent and almost Platonic or artificial material. And in the vertical axis, in the y-axis, we have from realism to idealism, something that we can maybe describe by showing organic form to very accurate and precise forms. So I would stop here, and I'm eagerly excited to hear from Anna this lecture. So let me stop sharing, and Anna, the floor is yours. Please, you can start whenever you're comfortable. I extend my warm welcome to you, and thanks for your attention.
Thank you so much, Arjen, for the introduction. Let me first share the screen. I have so many messages popping up.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm gonna take care of the joining, so you can now.
Yeah. So I can show you this. Yeah, the thing is, I only see my own screen, but you just tell me if
Everything is going. Yeah, it's wonderful.
So yeah, thank you. I think we can maybe have an interesting discussion on this formal matter and material form. I will tell you a bit more, maybe a bit more chronologically, how my work has developed, or at least by first giving an introduction on how I started. I started, by the way, I never studied, I don't know if I heard it well, but I never studied at the AA. I started actually just, my study started very unexpectedly, in the sense of that I didn't have a wish to study architecture. That was more like my father's idea, and I wanted actually to become an artist. Since I didn't have the right profile at high school, I did actually first building engineering school. So I'm a trained engineer, first of all, and then I studied architecture in Amsterdam. And when I completed my studies, I was very excited to leave this whole architecture scene and to continue within art. So for quite a while, I was assistant of a few artists in the development and the production of their work. An environment that I very much liked, as I found you can set your own rules, and you're I thought less formed by what I thought was happening in architecture, that it felt for me a bit a kind of, set in the way this is, you have to, if you want to be an architect, this is the way how you have to behave in a way. I also I really didn't like offices, so that was another reason why I was not good at an architect's office. But the interest in or my interest in working with artists helped me a lot to change basically the rules of the game, and that I thought, you know, I can also start working myself. And since I am trained as an architect, why not discover a bit more freely what my architecture could be about? And this research or this search, in a way, is very practice-based, but I adopted techniques from artists that I witnessed in the past. For instance, this Zen automatique that Arthur worked with. Oh, for instance, this kind of free drawings, unconsciously drawn, or this inkblot drawings, where you could say by a kind of different state of mind, form appears on paper, and then that form doesn't present anything specifically. So that form can be interpreted, that form can be studied, and still is, you know, in its openness, free to become a lot of different things. Rorschach, Hermann Rorschach, with the famous inkblot test, or the butterfly test, as it's often called, worked, of course, in a similar way, with this kind of interest that how we understand things often also has to do with our own perception of our inner self, and that inner self is, let's say, a psychological thing. And Freud has, of course, written endlessly about that. The way how we understand things is defined by our raising, our childhood, our cultural development, etc. So I can see something in this, but you will definitely see something else in that, and that is the interest and the fascinating part.
Okay, can you give me please a couple of minutes to translate so far?
Yeah.
Sorry. So okay. So من خلاصه چیزی که گفتم تا اینجا رو خدمتتون میگم. ایشون گفتن که من اول به عنوان با معماری شروع نکردم، خیلی حتی علاقه به معماری نداشتم. اول در مدرسه مهندسی رفتم، ولی بعدش به هنر خیلی علاقه داشتم، به خاطر اینکه معماری رو خیلی محدود می‌دیدم، خیلی در کلیشه ها، در اون مدل کار کردن در دفترها رو خیلی محدود کننده می‌دیدم و این آزادی که در هنر رو دوست داریم دوست داشتم و از همین دریچه هم بعداً به معماری ورود کردم که ما بتونیم بازنگری کنیم در خیلی از این چیزها. و یکی از مثالایی که میزنن این طرحهایی بود که ما دیدیم با جوهر آزاد روی ورق شکل گرفته و یک جور اکسپرشن شخصی، یک جور بیان شخصی، یک تعبیر فرویدیانه برای ایشون اینا، و از این دریچه در واقع کانسپتی رو میارن که از این مسیر به سمت معماری میره. اوکی؟
Yeah. What I did was I studied these forms, and I do use them, for instance, literally as plans for hypothetical buildings. So here you see drawn a plan of a tower that then I could build as models, and these I would show mainly my venues, or the context I was working in was within art institutes, and I would show them as autonomous models of architecture, not with the intention to build, but with the intention to discover, let's say, the possibilities for me that architecture could deal with. You see it in another iteration, the tower, or let's say interiors. Here's a temporary museum, which was a temporary exhibition space. And then in 2011, I was invited for an architecture competition in this museum, Fort Verte, which is one of the historical defense fortresses of the Netherlands, biggest infrastructural works ever being built in the Netherlands. It's an UNESCO monument, and it needed to have a museum to explain its history. And I got this really beautiful map of the existing site of a kind of eroded landscape, because this is a man-made fortress, of course, but covered in soil to protect against the bullets from cannons. And that landscape had changed over time and has become a bit more natural in its form. And what I found really beautiful was that I thought of that landscape was that you had all these irregular forms in it, and that these irregular forms, if you would just trace them, they would make, you would isolate them and they would make a more clearer form. And this I used literally to produce the architecture with. So here you see two courtyards, the ones that give light to the museum that is built underneath this ground, as the fortress is built underneath this ground. And here you see the underground plan next to it, where in this kind of free rectangle, all the walls that are captured there are traces from literally from the landscape drawing that I had received.
تا اینجا تعریف کردن که این فرم‌های آزاد رو که باهاش در اون طراحی‌های جوهر بود که در اولیه اینا رو اومدن مستقیم در پروژه مختلف تبدیل به پلان کردن. یک جاهای اینا اکسترود شد و یک برد شد که با گچ ساخته بودن، یا در پروژه دیگه که به همون با چوب ساخته بودن. و حالا همین ایده رو برای یک پروژه‌ای برای این موزه فورت وختن در هلند استفاده کردن و اومدن و اول در آنالیزی که داشتن در این سایت پلان این پروژه به این خطای آزاد نگاه کردن و این خطا رو همونجا آیزولیت و فریز کردن و از همین خطای آزاد سایت گرفتن و تبدیل به کورتیارد هایی کردن که در این پروژه اینجا می‌بینیم.
So here you see what you would see as a visitor when you are above ground. So you see the walls that follow let's say the high differences are Dutch landscape high differences. So they are the scale of a person. But you see how they follow these walls, or the walls follows the differences in the terrain. And this is the central courtyard of it. That has as a floor a model of the whole of a big part of the Netherlands, with all the fortresses indicated, but also the rivers, the dikes, the polders, etc. And in that building, the spaces are, let's say, feel a bit like fragmented puzzle pieces, in the sense that all the curves and all the bends are differently following the nature of that landscape. The windows follow these curves, etc. So you have this kind of form that appears from this kind of consequence of taking this drawing as its base, drawing that was never architecture, but that has been appropriated to form an architecture with. So in that diagram of the idealist versus what was the other side, the more I think the more natural side is what is happening here. I think all the spaces are in that sense then different, and there is this formal interrelationship, let's say, between landscape, between nature, between man-made landscapes and the architecture that showcases it.
Thank you. میگن که همینجوری که میبینی در واقع اینجا هم یک رابطه ای ما داریم بین طبیعت و اون چیزی که طبیعیه و چیزی که ساخت مصنوع انسان هست. و همونطوری که گفتم قبلا این خطوط منحنی هایی که میدیدیم، کرو هایی که دیوارا رو شکل میداد، همون کرو های توپوگرافی بود، مستقیم تبدیل به خط شده بود اینا در یک مرحله، و اون خطوط حالا اومدن و تبدیل شدن به این فضای منمید، فضای انسانسازی که میدونیم ریشش برمیگرده به همون طبیعت و فرم طبیعی. به دیاگرام اشاره کردن، دیاگرامی که اول در موردش صحبت کردم.
And this building, when it was being built, because let's say my research in architecture was mainly driven by drawing, as I saw that drawing is it's the base of the architect. That is the way how we annotate. But when the construction started, and this was my first construction that I was then also supervising, I understood that this concrete that I wanted this museum to be made of, what we actually were building was, of course, the formwork, and that formwork was so much at the definition of how the architecture would appear. And I thought this is something that I had never realized in architecture school, because if you draw a concrete building, you draw its concrete form, but you never, at least I had never understood so well that the formwork is defined by, is actually that what we are constructing. And that brought me to the fact that I thought what we are dealing with is maybe not only the drawing or so much the drawing, but what we are dealing with is how we can guide matter and how we can form matter, from its fluid state in the concrete to its solid state. And that from that moment on, I started actually becoming a lot more interested in how can we define matter when we are producing architecture.
و مطلب دیگه که در موردش صحبت کردن نقش دراینگ بود. یعنی میگن که وقتی که ما در مدرسه ترسیمات داریم و دراینگ معماری داریم، یک وقته متوجه نیستیم که دقیقاً داریم چی رو میکشیم، چی رو ترسیم میکنیم. و میگفت من اینجا وقتی که با سایت روبرو شدم در اون پروژه، واسه اولین بار اون قالب‌های بتون رو دیدم، اونجا متوجه شدم در واقع چیزی که ما داریم میسازیم، خطایی که ما داریم میکشیم، اینا قالب‌های بتون هستن و در واقع این خطوط ما هستن که دارن این متر رو یا این ماده رو در سایت فرم میدن و هدایت میکنن. و رابطه بین این دراینگ و ماده و متر، ترسیمات و ماده رو اینجا دارن بهش اشاره میکنن.
So what I want to show you is, as it was already introduced by Arjen, is this material gesture. I changed this slightly more to site, matter, and gesture. And I first wanted to highlight site and matter. These are two photos of Bahrain. Bahrain is where I live and work since 2014. One is a burial mound dating back to 4,000 years before Christ. And the other one is quite a recent land reclamation, as Bahrain is a small island state, and to be able to grow, it needs to reclaim land from the sea. And in both cases, what we are seeing and what I find fascinating is that there's basically a rearrangement of existing matter that is present. So it is either being put into a small little hill, or it is being put on top of each other to make land appear from the sea. And that all that material is present directly there. And in its rearrangement, you could say meaning is a higher meaning or more value is created through that. And I find extremely fascinating that it is just a rearrangement of exactly the same things that make something else in these examples. And what I do in my work is to see that site, to see place and site from a material perspective, and this can be from many different angles. So for me, site never has so much to do with a history of building in the sense that it has to do with its scenery that site has to do with, you know, how something is related to its landscape. But I see site much more as a productive element, as something that is literally the place where we source from and that we build upon with. And how can that relationship be used in architecture? For instance, here it's in a very quick example. This is a souk that we have renovated, but also we have built some new additional parts to it. That souk is built in coral stone that is taken from the sea as a traditional stone material in Bahrain. And what we did was like say, how can we make in a way a new stone, since this coral stone is protected nowadays in this concrete cast that has the same way, let's say, that the landscape has informed the formations of that stone. And that we did as bits and pieces in a way like the coral stone fragments that we can stack and build upon each other to make the new parts of the souk with, as you see here in some of the photos.
Thank you. چیزی که توضیح میدن، اول گفتن که من در واقع تمرکز روی 3 کانسپت دارم. کانسپت سایت، متر و جسچر، یعنی 3 با هم. و بعد توضیحی که دادن در موردش این بود که 2 مثال زدن. Can we go back to the slides you show the hills and the
Yep. This one or this one?
Yes, exactly. این 2 مثالی که زدن از طبیعت بحرین، جایی که کار میکنن. سمت چپ یک سری تپه‌های گورستان باستانی 4000 ساله است. سمت راست توسعه زمین هست. در بحرین میدونیم که مساحت به خاطر اینکه همه نیازمند اینن که در واقع خاک رو انباشت کنن و زمین رو توسعه بدن برای ساخت و ساز. و میگن که با وجود اینکه این بازه زمانی بسیار زیادی، ما میبینیم که در دوره‌های مختلف انسان داره این زمین رو و این ماده رو به فرم‌های مختلف در میاره برای اینکه ازش استفاده کنه یا باهاش کار کنه. و بعد در مورد 2 مفهوم پلیس و سایت صحبت کردن از دید متریالی و از دید ماده. اینکه چیزی که براشون جالبه اینه که ما از سایت همیشه میگیریم و به سایت پس میدیم، مدام در رابطه هستیم با زمین و سایت از نظر مادی. We go to the next souk lecture. The souk slide please. So exactly, thanks. و اینجا اشاره کردن برای مثال به یک بازاری در بحرین که برای ساختش از سنگ‌های مرجانی استفاده شده یا چیزی که بهش کورال استون میگن. حالا از همون تکنیک استفاده کردن برای اینکه این قطعات بتونی رو در واقع بیان و تلمبار شدن، انباش شدن این سنگ‌های مرجانی رو سعی کردن در این قطعات بتونی که ساختن میمیک کنن، اون رو تکرار کنن و همون رابطه رو با زمین داشته باشن. Thank you.
So there was just a very simple example of that relationship. It's a relationship that it's an interest that I already started working with in the Netherlands before I moved to Bahrain, and it had to do with a visit that I did to Petra in Jordan at that time with Bas Prins, the photographer, and the idea that, you know, we in Petra we can see an architecture that is made just by also a rearrangement of matter by in that case by excavation, and that are completely inseparable elements of landscape, nature, and architecture. Here you see this kind of casting process in the Netherlands. Here you see my studio excavating bits and pieces of cast that we were experimenting with, and you see the relationship also with the project of the souk. And here you see this cast that then we flipped around within that landscape, and they almost kind of, you know, if there would not be so much of a color difference or the kind of angles of the cutouts in it, they would disappear in it. And what I found really nice of this kind of way of forming matter is that there is actually not a drawing. There is no drawing that has been made to build with, and that the casts that result from it are very rich in form and expression of material. So here you see on the left side, you see the pouring side, so you see the solidification of matter. On the other side, you see the imprint of the landscape, a landscape that has been worked in. And you see, let's say, you see the free forms, you know, there where the material levels in relationship to its topography. And these pieces then, in the first start of it, were like models or small kind of folly structures that we would arrange in quite an archaic Stonehenge kind of way to define kind of spatial conditions with. You see that in a one-to-one pavilion. Yes.
مثال دیگه که زدن در واقع آزمایشی بود، کاری بود که امتحان کردن در پترا در اردن و باز میگن این همون ریارنج کردن متریال، تغییر ماده هست، دگرگون کردن ماده از حالتی به حالت دیگه و به تکنیک اکسکاویت کردن یا حفاری کردن و همینطور کست کردن یا ریختگری کردن اشاره کردن، جایی که ما یک حفاری انجام میدیم و بعد یک ماده‌ای رو در اون میریزیم و میگن این تمرینایی که کردن، این قطعاتی که اول در مقیاس ماکت بوده و بعداً تبدیل به ساختمان شده انجام دادن، این از یک دراینگ نیومده، از یک ترسیم نیومده، بلکه از تکنیک کستینگ اومده و ما میبینیم رد اون محیط اطراف رو که روی این قطعات افتاده و این ایده ادامه پیدا کرد تا به مقیاس 1:1 رسید و به اون ساختمانی که الان توضیح.
And that's a method that we used in a building that we recently did, or a few years ago in Bahrain, which is the Green Corner building. This is the headquarters of an NGO that is serving the cultural heritage of Bahrain. And this is a building that inside and out is dependent on this kind of casting method. This concrete is structural, so you see all the structural elements. And this building has been completely produced on its own site itself. So the elements are over time in series casted on the sand, as that is the soil base of Bahrain, casted on sand, placed in its building, and another series is being casted. And every time after a cast, you see here the sand, and it dissolves back in the site and is being rearranged for another cast. And these arrangements are not done by us; they are done by contractor and are actually only defined by us on mass. So what we have defined was the amount of concrete for a certain size of element, but never we defined form. And these are placed in, as I said, structurally in a building with a rear wall, as that is a sharing wall with the building behind it by Christian Gerrits, which is cast in situ, but the rest is all in this kind of in situ prefab casting methods. As I said, we had only defined mass, so these were kind of, ways of how we could control and engineer it without really defining form. And here you see the facade of that building. And yeah, what I think for me was really important here is that process or time becomes really an essential component of architecture. I find architecture always a bit, there is this kind of fixed end result somehow. Whereas what I find very fascinating about this building is that we see its process. So we see a time document of casts that have been done in a repetitive, moments, but always in different outcomes over time. And I find that, that brings a certain kind of more open reading, I think, to form as I was looking for within this ink blot in my drawing exercises.
Thank you. در مورد این ساختمان گرین کورنر بیلدینگ توضیح میدن که یک ساختمان NGO میراث فرهنگی بحرین هستش که ساختن و روش ساختش هم که تو اسلاید دیدین در واقع بتون ریختن در محل هست یا این سیتو و اینا رو در یک سری همونطور که تو سری قبل توضیح دادن در یک سری ماسه در واقع این بتون ریخته میشه و شکل ماسه هر دفعه عوض میشه. هر دفعه باز هر قطعه یک به یک قطعه ها ریخته میشن در سایت و حتی شکل دقیق اینها توسط معمار تعیین نمیشه. صرفا مقدار بتون مصرفی در هر بار که این ریخته میشه تعیین شده و اون کارگرها هستن که ارنج میکنن این ماسه رو در کف و فرم های مختلف به خودش میگیره این قطعات. و نکته مهمی که وجود داره اینجا بهش اشاره میکنم بحث پروسه و تایم هست، بحث روند و زمان. اینکه معماری اینجا دیگه فیکس نیست، فرم نهاییش توسط معمار در ترسیمات ابتدا تعیین نشده که بعد بره این همون انجام بشه و نتیجه به اون برسه. کاملا وابسته است به اون روند ساخت و زمان و میتونه هر شکلی بگیره و در واقع ترسیماتی که میاد در نهایت فرق میکنن با ترسیمات ابتدایی و این رو متمایز میکنه با اغلب کارهای دیگه معماری.
Great. Let me just see what we have here. Oh yeah. Let's say we were discussing. So I'm a professor at the ETH in Zurich since 5 years. And before that, I was professor at the the Academie also in Switzerland. And we do there this research on what we call material gesture. And this is one of, I just thought I don't show you the outcome of the students, but the way how we engage with place, as it illustrates also my own interest in my practice. We went to Volcanic Island in Kyushu in the south of Japan. And there we look at this landscape as something that has, in its materiality, has formed by its own conditions. Therefore, we wanted to go to a volcanic landscape as the changes are very dramatic and very unstable, you could say, and therefore we can witness them more strongly. And how as humans we kind of try to benefit from these conditions. Here we went, for instance, to the many onsens or hot springs that are there, and to understand it's the minerality of it that colors these waters, or let's say soil excavations to gain its high rich iron presence out of it, or sulfur, traditional kind of sulfur harvesting, or let's say the more longer geological formations, as you see here in the basalt stone. And these things, or maybe this last thing, this is also very fascinating. This is traditional cooking based on the hot springs that are there, that you see on the left. That is a traditional kitchen, and there's this beautiful, crazy sediments of all the minerals that have set over time. Or let's say more volcanic research, in the sense that we, of course, don't want to be, how to control the harm of such a strong landscape. To the, let's say, the more spiritual engagement, here you see a Buddhist procession worshipping certain places within the mountains. And what we do with the students is then to say, how can these kind of things that we witness in these landscapes, how can they inform an architecture. You know, how can we work with it as architects in the way, how can we engage in these processes rather than that we work, I think, let's say, rather than we work from a preconceived ideal state of architecture, how can we actually engage with what I think we naturally should deal a lot more with, which is the instability of things.
یک مثالی که میزنن از سفرهایی که داشتن با دانشجوهاشون در دانشگاه ETH که تدریس میکنن. قبل از این هم در دانشگاه امروزه رو تدریس میکردن در سوئیس، الان استاد هستن در ETH. با شاگرداشون رفتن در یکی از این سفرها به لندسکیپ هایی در ژاپن و توضیح میدن که علت این که اونجا انتخاب کردن این بود که به طور خاص لندسکیپ هایی بود مربوط به کوههای آتشفشانی و میگفتن این تصویری که ما داریم از طبیعت که یک چیز ثابته رو یک چنین لندسکیپ هایی به چالش میکشن، معنا که این محیط طبیعی مدام در حال حرکتن، مدام در حال تغییرن و آدما حالا به شکل‌های مختلفی با این مواجه میشن در مثالایی که زدن و بعداً از دانشجوها خواستن که چجوری با این ایده بتونن در واقع به پروژه ها فکر کنن با محیط زیستی که مدام در حال تغییره و چجوری این میتونه معماری رو در واقع الهام بخش معماری باشه.
So site and matter, I hope, is a bit explained and framed in this thing. Then there's the other thing is the matter and gesture. In this project that I showed you, this green corner building, all the doors and windows, the window shutters are made in cast aluminium. And we started working with aluminium as it has its local presence in Bahrain, since it has one of the largest aluminium smelters in the world. And this is because, of course, of the cheap energy that is here. And I followed with the artist Armin Linke, the twill of aluminium from its smelter to, let's say, local workshops and its contemporary building production that we see here as a material that is overly present and is, you could say, the new vernacular material. And I wanted to use that material, but I wanted to see, you know, to express more strongly and also within the relationship with this building that this material doesn't need to come in the sheets and profiles that we buy, because in a way these are kind of ready-mades and has a certain kind of application in mind, but that we use aluminium in its fluid state, that we still can form it and still can give it different expressions.
توضیحی که میدن در مورد پنجره هاست در این پروژهشون که از آلومینیوم تشکیل شده. میگن که یکی از بزرگترین کارخانه های ذوب آلومینیوم در بحرین هستش و به خاطر ارزون بودن انرژی در اینجا خیلی استفاده ازش گسترده است. منتها به شکل یک متریال ورنکولار جدید دارن بهش نگاه میکنن اینجا، جایی که حالا نیاز نیست که حتما به صورت سنتی و یا به شکل صنعتیش این متریال در پروفایل یا در شیت قطعات استاندارد بیاد، بلکه این میتونه از اون سیال بودن مصالح استفاده کنن و حالا آلومینیوم رو هم کست کنن. یعنی اونطور که بتون رو میریختن در روی سطوح نامنظم، آلومینیوم رو هم در چنین سطوحی بریزن و یک فرم متفاوتی که در تصویر میبینیم برای این در تشکیل بدن.
And here you saw the in motion the entrance door of the building. As a metal cast, any metal that is casted is always a hollow cast. You don't cast these things solid because you have such a high temperature differences from it when it cools down, and that will crack and shrink very aggressively. So you cast hollow. and therefore you have this kind of negative form within this form that is made by the imprint of its formwork, and you get in that sense relatively light elements. So all these elements are put in motion, like the door or like the shutters, and give a kind of moving form within that building. And as I said, the cast is, let's say, what I wanted to say is, let's say, when you change the material, but you, the whole production, the whole way of how to produce something becomes different. And I very much like to explore these possibilities. So here you see the formwork preparation, the formwork making preparation in the foundry that started literally by having this kind of sandbox with its sand form, and that sand form we placed a kind of 1 centimeter thick silicon on it, and that silicon is at the end the positive form you want to make in aluminium. And with that one, you produce the formworks that are also made of sand. They're chemically bound sands, and in that you cast the elements. And what I found very beautiful in this, when you cast material, is that you have this kind of instability, or let's say you have all its differences visible. So you have all these color differences by the heat differences, the way how the material has flowed in the formwork, etc. So let's say what you can also see in concrete, as it's in a concrete cast, you see in this aluminium as well, that you have all the different hues and different material expressions within it.
Okay, great. اینجا توضیح میدن که در روند ساخت این قطعات آلومینیومی رو برای پنجره ها، و میگن از اونجایی که اینا باید سبک باشن و بچه راحت چرخوندشون حرکتشون داد، تو خالی هستن. و حالا روش کسر کردنش رو توضیح دادن که از طرف این تو خالی بودن به این کمک میکنه که انقباض انبساط اینا رو باعث شکستن بشه و خیلی هم سبک باشن. و بعد توضیح دادن که اون فرم پوزیتیو رو میان با ماسه اول درست میکنن، ولی از اونجایی که ماسه میچسبه به آلومینیوم مذاب، روی ماسه یک لایه سیلیکون اپلای کردن و بعد این در واقع اون پوزیتیو رو، اون قالب آلومینیوم رو براشون درست کرد و بعد توی اون آلومینیوم ریختن و این فرم جدید رو گرفتن.
So what we so this kind of expression of states of matter, let's say from fluid to solid, is something that we use a lot with, and I think if there's one thing that I enjoy a lot is casting materials. And here you see work that we did for Maison Margiela. They asked us in 2018 to come up with a complete new store identity for all their stores worldwide. And we worked closely with the designer John Galliano on this project. And what Galliano had done was he identified in the work of Martin Margiela more the gestures of making rather than its end products. So we overlapped really well in the interest in this thing, and we started working with these gestures to produce these architectural elements with, like the columns that you see here. And these columns are made in a textile formwork that sometimes have constraints put on them. And then within that formwork that is fluid or flexible, let's say, gypsum is casted or gypsum is applied in this kind of bag of formwork, and therefore sets and hardens in different ways, as you can see here in some of the model studies that we did for it. And here later on in the production in Italy, that we worked with artisans to translate this method in a one-to-one production. And what you see in the cast is the imprint of the textile as a formwork. You see, of course, the way how the walls have been formed, the constraints that have been put on them, and within this kind of conditions, they are placed in the stores. And this was for me the base to have, first of all, in a store that is almost completely only about interior, to have a definition of architecture, first of all, in it. So these are, for me, really like very basic space definers, like walls and columns in space. Here you see another store that we did in London, and an extra photo of the Paris store.
این پروژه‌ای که نشون میدن پروژه طراحی مغازه‌های برند مزون مارژلا در پاریس و لندن، و ازشون خواستن که یک هویت جدیدی برای این برند با کمک یک دیزاینر دیگری طراحی کنن. و خصوصیتی که اتفاقا طراحی همین برند فشن مزون مارژلا داره اینه که خیلی پروسه رو میخوان نشون بدن، یا به قول ایشون جسچر آف میکینگ رو نشون بدن، و بحث فقط در مورد فاینال پروداکت یا اون محصول نهایی نیست. و از این نظر خیلی نزدیک بودن به ایده های دفتر ایشون و اومدن و در اینجا حالا یک روش دیگر از این کسب کردن رو این بار با گچ امتحان کردن، با این ورق‌های گچ که نشون دادن و پروتوتایپ‌هایی که ساختن، و در نهایت اومدن و المان‌های معماری رو به نوعی باز تعریف کردن، المان دیوار، المان ستون و غیره، با این بیان جدید مسئله.
And my third part of this lecture is how do these things how can they work together as a holistic understanding of it. For that, I often use Michael Heitzer, American landscape artist, although he wouldn't want to be called an American landscape artist. And this is I think, a very interesting quote from him, where he says, "I think American landscape art is one thing, but my work doesn't have anything to do with it. It has to do with material. When I bought property in Nevada, I bought it because I had done studies and I found gravels and sands that could make concrete and clay soils that could be used for soil cements and running water. These were all raw materials. If you bought an acre of land in that part of the world, you were buying all the material you could use in a lifetime." And here you see him working on complex 1, 2, and I think 3 and 4 have been realized not so long ago, since early 70s. Whereas he is, what I try to show also in the photos that I took from Bahrain, is this kind of, the material is already there present, and when we build, we also source, and how are these two related to each other. Another example that I visited not so long ago is in Aswan in Egypt, in the south of Egypt, where you have this beautiful obelisk. It's called the unfinished obelisk, and you see here that this is monolithic stone directly cut out of the bedrock. Then apparently a crack had appeared in that stone, and they have abandoned the excavation of the stone. But what I find really beautiful is that there's this kind of crazy big and heavy stone isolated from it, and then would have been transported, and that this kind of relationship between mining, sourcing, and construction is so apparent here.
و حالا در مثالی که زدن از اولی از هنرمند آمریکایی مایکل هایزر و بعداً این سایت تاریخی، اشاره کردن به جاهایی که هنرمند از خود ماده رو از خود اون سایت، از خود اون طبیعت میگیره و باهاش یک چیزی درست میکنه برای اونجا. در مثال مایکل هایزر اون پروژه نواداش بود که تو اون نقل قولش گفته بود که مصالح من در واقع تو خود این زمینه، همین خاکیه که از همون سایت میگیره و همونجا استفاده میکنه. و اینم مثال دیگری است اینجایی که دارن نشون میدن که قرار بوده یک اوبلیسک، یک بنای یادمانی درست بشه در این سایت و بعداً این داشته از خود این سنگ‌های موجود در این سایت تراشیده می‌شده و بعداً دیدن که یک ترکی توش هست و این رو همونجا رها کردن و این اونجا مطلع شده یک مدرکی که نشون میده چجوری در این پروژه ها هم
Hello? Hello?
I
Yeah.
think I got disconnected for a second, but I'm back. Okay. So,
Sorry. Suddenly the sound all stopped. Yeah.
We can go on
here. Yep.
Okay.
Okay, good. Then the last project that I want to show you within this is the MISC Art Institute that we have actually currently under construction in Riyadh, in Saudi Arabia. They started as a competition in 2019. Sorry, the slide is in for people that that I speak to that do not know so much about the Middle East. But for today, this is a lot more obvious where we are in the world. But I also show it because I wanted to show this conditions of this landscape that we based the project, where let's say the way how this is built within that place is of importance. It's the Wadi Khanifa, which is a wadi that is at the origin also of Riyadh. And that starts from the Tuareg Mountains and a mountain ridge an hour away from the capital. I find extremely, let's say for me, these kind of landscapes are the landscapes I love the most, as I found this kind of bare mineral presence one of the most beautiful things to see and to work with, as you understand from my from the way how I'm interested in sites. And this is the location of the museum before we started construction. On top of the plateau, a new city of a new part of Riyadh city will develop, which is called MISC City. This is a non-profit city, basically consists mostly of education and cultural projects. And then there is the bottom of the wadi and the height differences, 30-35 meters. That wadi is protected. This is a protected green zone. But this museum is supposed to be built as the only building that should make a connection between city and this wadi. And therefore we need to bridge this 30-meter height difference. So our initial approach was to cut out of the or our proposal is to cut out of this escarpment a place within that limestone rock, and within that place we can build another thing that is the volume of the museum, and here formed by a stone. And these are the models of the competition submission, where we show that excavation, and then within that a building is free standing, a glass building that houses the exhibition spaces of this new art institute. And the top of that building, the rooftop, is flush with the city level, which has its buildings on top of that, and acts as a big public square overlooking the wadi. And here you see this is of a few months ago, the excavation within that escarpment. So it's really kind of cut out within that landscape to provide this space for the building. Here you see more in detail the cutout in that limestone rock. And then here, one of the models, one of the many models of the building standing within it. And here more in detail models where you have that excavation, you have a 24-hour, an all-time access between city and wadi landscape. And you have this kind of public space in between the cutout and the building. And then the building that is completely made in cast, will be completely made in cast glass elements, and as an envelope of its building. And in the way how these panels are stacked, they form this kind of converging spaces in between, spaces that are naturally shaded by its proximity, and you can walk around it. And here you see what I meant with this kind of, how that these panels, how they are stacked, how they form this kind of oblique geometry, creating this different kind of in-between spaces.
این پروژهشون هست، پروژه موزه هست در ریاض که توضیح دادم در یک لندسکیپ خیلی به خصوص، جایی که خیلی علاقه داشتن به خاطر انقدر یک دست بودنش این رو ساختن و یک فاصله ارتفاعی هست در این لندسکیپ، در این منظر که وادی مینامنش، که یک فاصله ارتفاع هست بین سطح که در سمت راست میبینیم و اون دره در پایین، و اینا تونستن که با ایجاد یک حفره در این قسمت بیان و ساختمون رو در اونجا قرار بدن، همونطور که تو تصاویر دیدیم. و با قرار دادن ساختمون در اونجا، حالا اون ساختمون یک فاصله، یک گپی با دیوارهای اون حفره داره و در اون یک فضای پابلیک، فضای عمومی درست کردن که سایه هم هست و هوا احتمالاً خنک‌تره در اون فاصله. و بعد در مورد متریال صحبت کردن، در مورد این مساله شیشه کست شده، حالا این بار شیشه رو کست کردن و یک اکسپرشن جدیدی از شیشه برای نما رو اینجا امتحان کردن.
And in this, in the material development for this building, the client had wished that the client had made clear that they wanted a daylight museum, and a museum that is not so much only, let's say, a kind of classic display, but also is a space for performance or all different kind of art forms that could take place there. And we worked on this glass, as that is, we thought the most obvious way, of course, how to bring in light, but a glass that has this kind of mineral imprint that we can witness in its landscape. And these glass elements, we then try to find a way, a logic. These are the very, very early models where we try to find a way how they could become building elements. First, they were thought as hollow elements, but then we figured out that actually a solid cast would give us a lot more structural opportunities how to build that facade together. This is a one-to-one test of this cast glass that we have just made with the factory last month, and that these casts, as I said, need to be stacked in a way that they also make sense in the way how they are built, with its, the way how we can relate them structurally, formally, but also in their light performance, etc. These wrap around the building and then have this kind of inner glass facades that does the other part of the job, that is being the insulator, to make sure that the climate conditions are met within inside. But that glass on the outside is with its relief with that kind of mineral relief is a diffused glass. So it's a non-see-through glass. So we use glass purely for its light transmittance, as you see in all the models, in the study models that we did in my studio. And where we actually want to have a window to look out, we don't place a cast glass element, but we place a clear glass, solid glass element with the same kind of thickness as this cast glass elements are. And here you see one of the competition photos of the interior of how this kind of glass could provide this kind of daylight conditions, and you would feel through the light differences the presence of the surroundings, the proximity of things, the orientation of the sun, of course, but you would not be bothered by view, as that would distract, of course, the way how we want to engage with what is happening inside. And these were and this kind of light conditions that it gives, we think, is very for contemporary presentations in sculpture, installations, performances, would work really well. But then on the inner glass facade, we provided kind of screens that can dim this light further. So it's in a way, it's a kind of photographic instrument that can close more and more the transmittance of light until, let's say, we want to have video projections or very low light conditions for sensitive objects. And here you see a few more photos of the kind of the conditions of the space.
خب مطالب متعددی رو گفتن. از جمله اینکه این نما در واقع 2 تا لایه شیشه داره برای اینکه هوا رو هم کنترل کرد و در واقع در لایه بیرونی ما این مصالح شیشه کسر رو می‌بینیم که یک ضخامتی داره و یک حالت سالیدی رو داره، شبیه بلاک ورک از در واقع رو هم چیدن. و بعد جاهایی که می‌خواستن که دید باشه و پنجره باشه، اونجا رو از شیشه شفاف عادی استفاده کردن. بعد فضای داخل استفاده متعددی ازش میشه، از پرفورمنس تا اگزیبیشن، و حالا این رو در جاهای مختلف در واقع مصالح مختلفی رو تعبیه کردن مناسب با اگر یک جایی باید تصویر پروژکت بشه یا غیره، در واقع شیشه مناسب اون رو سعی کردن که استفاده کنن.
And what let's say this kind of way of forming these panels had to do with all these things that I said before in relationship to the green corner building, or this way how matter is formed. But I believe it gets more rich in the sense that it really alters its performance, and that performance can be brings in the other possibilities, how it relates to sites. Here, this is just a daylight study of the light passing by through this glass, if it is unfiltered and uncontrolled. And my interest in this building is that we can experience place purely from its light conditions. When I moved here to Bahrain, I thought one of the most powerful and most fascinating things of being here is that kind of strength of light. We measured it with we work with a daylight expert on this project that we measure on a daily situation. Here we measure 5 times more light than in the brightest day, let's say in the mid of Europe. So it is this kind of extreme power and extreme strength of it that we want to bring in this building. And then the rest of this building is made purely as a kind of skeleton. So it is, so the total of it is just really like skin and bones. And that skeleton, we worked with a Swiss engineer on Mario Manotti, that's also professor in Mendrisio, in the way how can we minimize that skeleton, but also in its minimization, give it all its characteristics. Here you see a 1:10 model of a core with its floor slabs and the different kind of beams that we need to make all the cantilevers possible. And we have this kind of situation where we had this form, in a way, this kind of skewed form defined by the way how these glass elements are stacked and interrelated, and make sure they give this completely diffused light through it. That let's say that the structure needs to follow that. And as you can see here on the top right corner, for instance, you have beams that stick out that have no relationship anymore to, let's say, the cores for the vertical loads. So it's this kind of interaction of core that has this main outriggers, and that kind of branches out further and further by stacking these beams in their relationship, until you have this kind of, what I find very beautiful, this kind of floating beams almost in the furthest extents of the project. And here you could say form all appears from kind of structural principles that are followed to its extremes. No, that are followed just by its own consequence to it. And that is I think that's the other element, let's say, of this building.
اول در مورد نور صحبت کردن، کیفیت نور، که یکی از نکات جالب بود براشون در خاورمیانه، و گفتن حتی اندازه‌گیری کردن توسط متخصصا شدت نور رو، و یه چیز حدود 5 برابر نوریه که در اروپا میگیرن. این نور در خاورمیانه یا در عربستان 5 برابر اروپا. و خب این متریال کسر شده شیشه باعث میشه که کمک کنه این فیلتر بشه و بتونن کیفیت‌های مختلفی رو داخل تجربه کنن. و در مورد استراکچر صحبت کردن، استراکچر مرکزی که شکل گرفته و طراحی این سیستم کور چیزی شبیه سیستم کورن اوتریگر هست، اما این تیرها رو میبینیم که هرچی از کور فاصله میگیرن، اینا شبیه یک سری تیرهای معلق در هوا میشن، یعنی لزوما یک منطق خیلی محدود سازه‌ای ندارن، و به خاطر اینکه دارن با محیط این ساختمان هم کار میکنن یک عمق زیادی دارن، و این افزایش واقع تیرها از سمت‌های مختلف براشون در این طرح مورد توجه بود.
Now this museum light conditions that are actually already expressed. What I find very beautiful with the glass is that it is such ambiguous material. Let's say a history of modern architecture is about glass and how transparent or non-transparent this material is. But even in the different, the same material in the different conditions on the different angles performs very ambiguously, which I find extremely fascinating. But of course, this is a museum, so we also need to control in the way the light conditions that we have on the inside. And as I said, we have this kind of mesh wall blinds structures behind that can dim this light to off different light levels that we need for the presentations of arts, or can be completely left open and the building is bare with only its glass facades. Another aspect of glass is that it has ends, and ends can flare up. This is something that can actually only be understood in a one-to-one presence of glass in its actual place. So that's something that has to do with the ambiguous state, let's say, of the unpredictable state of the material. And then we have the way, how is this material actually formed in this way? We do quite a few projects in glass. This is glass that is made for a pearl museum that we're making in Bahrain for the windows. This is slumped glass or kiln formed glass. That's the official name, is where you buy standard float glass and you reheat it in a kiln that it can form over a formwork. It's a very efficient way of forming glass. A very nice way. With my students, we did a glass semester and we did a lot of work ourselves in the kiln in this kind of way. And then you have, of course, because the glass has just one thickness, which is the thickness of the glass you buy, it has its imprint, but it also has formed over its molds. Here you see the results of these windows for the Pearl Museum. This is the Pearl Museum under construction, but I will skip that for now. And another method is the casting method, where you actually, like, let's say, like concrete, you cast solids. So it means that the production of glass is at its complete fluid state and not the elastic state in the slumping method. So it's poured in at 1600 degrees in a formwork, and then almost directly can be taken out of that formwork and then can be even altered. So here you see, for instance, presses, hand presses, or mechanical presses that can form its surface of glass. It's still moldable, but it will not flow away. You know, it has its form. And here you see, as I showed you already in a photo before, the first samples, just a section of this kind of glass that we are developing for the art museum. The eventual panels will be around 2.5 by 4 meters. This is a cast glass that has never been used in architecture in these sizes. So it means we are working now for like a few years on just researching and trying to make possible this glass, and also to make it possible in the most economic or financial efficient ways, as we don't have crazy budgets here either. And after that, the glass has been casted, and it is in this kind of red glowing state. It can be taken out of its formwork and then goes in what they call an annealing oven. And this is this very long trajectory. You see, this oven can be like 100 meters long, in which the glass travels over time and will be gradually cooled down where it is in the position in that oven. Because if you would cool the glass down immediately, it would just crack and break. So you need to very, very slowly cool this glass down. And in the thicknesses that we work with, which is a kind of average thickness of 8 centimeter, it would mean that it would be 1.5 to 2 weeks in this oven to cool down. And that also explains why standard glass that we buy is never thicker than 2 centimeters, because that will be a very inefficient way of producing industrial glass, as it would take a lot more time for glass panels to be produced.
توضیحات مفصلی در مورد این شیشه دادن. اول اینکه در مورد کانسپت امبیگیوتی صحبت کردن، این مبهم بودنی که این مصالح کلاس داشت بهشون میداد، و اینکه از زاویه‌های مختلف شما ببینین میزان ترانسپرنسی مختلفی داریم، و اینکه حالا این با این مسئله چجوری در موزه دیل کردن و سعی کردن اینو کنترل کنن. از لب دیگه‌ای که بهش اشاره کردن، سطوح نهایی سطوح جداره‌های این شیشه بود. وقتی که نور به اینا میتابه سطوح جداره‌هاش هم روشن میشه و حالا اینم از افکتایی که داشتن مطالعه می‌کردن روش. و باز بعد از اون در مورد تکنیک کسکلاس این شیشه ریخته شده در قالب صحبت می‌کردن که با دانشجوهاشون هم روش‌های مختلفی رو امتحان کردن. یک روش ساده اینه که شیشه معمولی رو روی قالبی با یک فرم خاصی میذارم و با حرارت دادن اون شیشه باعث میشه که اون ذوب بشه و اون فرم رو بگیره. ولی در مقیاس صنعتی و کار حرفه‌ای‌تر واسه پروژه کاری که داشتن میکردن، در یک کارخونه شیشه رو تا 1600 درجه سانتیگراد حرارتش افزایش شدن و این رو در واقع قالب بندی میکنن و میریزن و ابعاد پنل های 2.5 متر در 4 متر رو تونستن که باهاش بگیرن برای این پروژه که آسون نبوده برای و اولین باره که در یک ساختمون داره این نوع شیشه در این ابعاد استفاده میشه. و بعد پروسه خنک کردنش رو توضیح دادم برای اینکه نشکن پروسه طولانی خنک کردن داره و غیره و خلاصه تمام مراحلی که طی میشه تا این متریال ویژه برای این پروژه طراحی بشه ساخته بشه.
Sorry, that's a lot of technical things to translate. I will just skip to have a little walk around this building. Here's the glass, but it's very beautiful in the glass is because it has, when you have cast glass and it has this thickness, you really have this kind of depth that is almost ununderstandable to see. If you don't see its edge, where does something stop? It's like looking in a pond, or let's say in clear water. And then I think the last thing that I wanted to show you, I will skip this part, is just to go around the building, and I think we can then go for questions. Here we are. This is the entrance of the building, so the entrance lobby and the internal windows where you would look down in one of the main exhibition spaces. And here is the building, how it is within its excavated space, standing within it. So if you would appear from the city level, you would actually not see any building. You would most likely see just only its roof terrace as a kind of square extending naturally from the streets. But if you would approach from body level, of course, you would see this a full height building sticking out of that excavation. And that's the last slide of my presentation.
Let me translate the last part.
Yep. Sorry.
و دوباره برگشتن به تصاویر کلی از این پروژه. دوباره توضیح دادن که این پروژه از یک سمت با زمین هم سطح، در اون سطح بالا و انگار که امتداد همون میدون هست و شما نمایی تقریبا نمیبینین، و در سمت دیگه که سمت این صحرا یا وادی هست ما کل این ساختمون رو میبینیم داره بین این دو تا لول مختلف ارتباط برقرار میکنه و همینطور فضاهای اطرافش رو اشاره کردن، فضاهایی که بین این سایت حفاری شده و این ساختمون که در این محیط قرار داره. Okay, thank you so much. I enjoyed it a lot. Thanks.
My pleasure.
For your presentation, and also from the conceptual to technicals. I am sure a lot of our audience have questions about both, but I'm gonna use my privilege to ask the first one since I have the mic now, and then we can go ahead and ask the audience. Maybe you guys can get ready and have your questions here in chat. I opened the chat for you so you can write it down either in Farsi or English. We'd be happy to take and translate. So it's fascinating to see your practice. Is quite like an art practice as you described. It feels to me like that you have there is an interesting process from a material study to making physical models and taking it into a building. It seems like that you have a collection of ideas and concepts and you draw from them once in a while and then use it in different projects. And in the first place, a lot of these concepts, they seem to me quite universal ideas about material and geometry and all that. But then, as you explained, we understand how they're related to a specific context, and either geographical context or cultural context. So it would be wonderful if you can explain a little more about this, that how do you combine the two universal aspect of these as an art piece, let's say, or the conceptual piece, and the local aspect in your work, and how you connect the two. And then I will have a following connection about a specific region in the Middle East, and how do you deal with it from your perspective as a person not from the Middle East, but perhaps one of the people who can do a very good contemporary new vernaculars, as you put it, when you were talking about the cast aluminium. It's quite fascinating to me.
Yeah, maybe I answer in the reverse order. It's, I moved here to Bahrain in, as I said, in 2014, as I got married, and my wife was already living here, as he's Palestinian, and we chose, or actually I think I chose a bit more than she did, that I was really excited to move to the Middle East. I was also a bit done with being in Amsterdam for such a long time, and I wanted something that you know, would really challenge many aspects in me, but also my practice. And since I'm in this kind of Dutch-Palestinian relationship and family that we have, I learn from that perspective that, let's say, informs my perspective on the Middle East as a place with a lot of challenges, you could say, but also with a lot of possibility to change and to make a better world, which I strongly believe in. And I get often outside of it challenged for why am I here in, and then the negative aspects of this place are mentioned to me. But I feel like, yeah, by being here, I can actually really engage in things and actually can really work on a change within, you know, all of its constraints and possibilities that we might find. And in that sense, I might think maybe also an optimistic person, that I think that that one day I will also live in Palestine with my family, let's say. You know, that would be the dream. So that's the way how I look at this place. And then I think for me there was always something to live in a place where we have this bare mineral presence, where you have this bare landscape. I find this, you know, this is something I find so fascinating to be in, and I'm still not done with it, you know. So I find the way how to engage in that fits for me a lot more naturally. And then maybe we can go to this way how we express place, and the way how we work, how I work. Let's say my work is very, maybe can be very understood initially, very sculptural, but it has more to do with the fact that I look for innovation in form, and that innovation in form is defined by its materiality and the way how that materiality defines space. You know, and that is for me, you could say, that's my agenda in the work. It's actually a very simple to understand agenda. But so the agenda for me is not so much within the brief, or the agenda is not so much, you know, if you do a competition, there will be 10 architects that will all follow the brief, but the outcome is very different. And my outcome really has to do with that kind of invention of the materiality and the spatial conditions that it can give. And for me, this museum that I ended with can only be built here. You know, for me, that museum wouldn't make sense in the Netherlands. You know, that or wouldn't make sense in Switzerland. This museum that is working specifically with these conditions here. Not that I don't think a daylight museum and with this kind of, you know, there's a beautiful museum by Zumthor in Bregenz, you know, that he did so many years ago. Or there is Maison de Fer by in Paris, you know, as this house with this glass brick facade. For me, these are, you know, if you look a bit more precisely, are dealing much more precisely with its place, and therefore are in a way also different. And another aspect that I find interesting is if I would do the same things here and I would do the exact same thing somewhere else, the outcome will be different. And that is, I think, another thing that I like within the work. I mean, maybe it's not radically different, but we can witness all these differences. As James Turrell, for instance, would make his crater work the first time to focus us on the sky, and he could do that work all over the world, but that sky will always be a different sky, you know, somehow. And then, of course, you could say the sky is the sky and it's universal, but at the same time, it's different. You know, we can speak about the light in Iran at a certain place that we admire so much for the conditions of that light that we don't see somewhere else. You know, that it has this poetry in that condition at that place. And I think that is that's maybe something that I wish to be present in my work. And you mentioned the last thing that I wanted to respond to is that aluminium, that we started working in aluminium a lot, has to do also with what are the opportunities a place can bring. In first appearance, Bahrain appeared to me extremely limited, as I thought I can't get anything. But within that constraint, we're finding more and more possibilities, you know. And so that is, it's very interesting to look at place from what are actually its opportunities that we can open up and work with.
Super interesting, especially the way you describe it as a new vernacular, and it's somehow working pretty well in the Middle East. And it's kind of accepted as a local work of architecture, but it's at the same time something new, and also it's a universal technique. Maybe it could be done somewhere else, but again, contextualizing it there, the way you explain it is quite interesting. Give me a minute to summarize the translation.
Yeah.
توضیحی که میدن، اول در موردشون پرسیدم که در مورد یک معمار اروپایی که در خاورمیانه کار میکنن و در این فضا تجربهشون چی بوده. ایشون گفتن سال 2014 با یک خانمی از فلسطین ازدواج کردن و از اون موقع اومدن به بحرین و این منظر و طبیعت و محیط زیست یا لندسکیپ بحرین براشون جالب بوده و به نظرشون یک تجربه نوعی بوده. و در مورد این سوال کردم که چقدر شما کارتون رو یونیورسال میبینید، کاری که میکنید، و چقدر مربوط به اون محیط خاص، مربوط به اون فرهنگ و جغرافیای خاص. ایشون میگن که هر دو تا قسمت قضیه هست، یعنی هم یک کانسپتی ممکن تو همه این کارا باشه که یونیورسال باشه، شما جاهای مختلف اینو دیده باشید، ولی در نهایت این پروژه وقتی در اون محل قرار میگیره به نوع دیگه شکل میگیره. مثلا اون پروژه موزه در ریاض اگر همون کانسپت در جای دیگه میشد تصور کرد، به شکل دیگه نهایی میشد به خاطر ویژگی‌های محیطی که اونجا وجود داره و غیره. و بعد اینکه خیلی به امکانات اونجا فکر میکنن، مثلا بحث آلومینیوم رو که کردن که ما مصالح ورناکولار جدید رو درست کنیم در اینجا، به این داشتن فکر میکردن که امکانات اونجا چیه. همونطور که اشاره کردن کارگاه‌های ذوب آلومینیوم اونجا بود و انرژی ارزون بود، پس یک متریالیه که خیلی وابسته است به اون محیط و اون اقتصاد و اون جغرافیا و از دل اونجا این ورنکولار جدید داره. Okay, I see a question in the chat from Pedram. He says, "Hi, thanks. Is there a philosophy behind your preference of casting methods over other manufacturing methods, for example, over digital computational methods? I see it a lot coming. You cast from concrete to glass to aluminium to plaster. So, can you explain a bit this method?" And he says, in contrast to other digital methods that was super common maybe a few years ago.
Yes, I mean, at the ETH, we also have a lot of, we have the whole focus also on digital fabrication. We are also not shy of digital tools. So we use a lot of 3D scanners, CNC milling, machines. Of course, we use the computer and everything. So I just don't, you know, at the end of the day, it is real material that is being formed, no, in one way or the other. And the tools or the way how to form it, my interest is that how can I somehow stay away from defining that form too much, you know, so that there is something of the characteristic and the nature of the material itself that becomes apparent. So if, for instance, if I would let material flow under a slope, every material would slope down differently. The elasticity is differently. And I find interesting that that is an expression of materiality that makes one material different from the other one. And I think when we are too much focused on trying to define a very clear input, you know, we need to be defining on forehand a lot, you know. So you showed this graph where we go to, you know, what you call the ideal form, but maybe you could also say the preconceived form, you know, the one that we have defined on forehand, and then everything has to follow that blueprint. Although I would be very happy if I could build a pyramid. No, that's not the pyramid. I would find something else. But the rest is like, you know, I try to find a method where I'm much more engaged in the process and working with something rather than I have set or I have fixed on forehand what its outcome should be. You know, and I think it relates a bit to this digital and computer methods. If you don't watch out, you know, if you don't watch out, you are actually defining that what you already somehow know, you know, that's what you already somehow have understood. And I think it is, it's not solely the case, because I mean, there's many ways I know from colleagues how to also use that as a creative tool. But for me, it is, because it is so strongly related to the materiality, I think it has to be in a more direct engagement with it to figure out what are its possibilities. And then we use all the tools necessary to analyze it, to document this, to test this and whatever. Yeah.
Wonderful. Can I give a quick translation? توضیح میدم که یک امکانی که داره، این گرایشی که دارن در استفاده از متریال و تست کردن مسائل مختلف، اینه که شما لزوما همیشه نتیجه نهایی رو نمیدونید. خیلی وقتا شگفت زده میشین از طرحی که به دست میارین، در صورتی که یک وقتایی مثلا با استفاده از ابزار کامپیوتیشنال ما داریم یه کاری رو میکنیم که تهش میدونیم چی میشه، یعنی خودمون رو محدود میکنیم با این کار و راه سورپرایز شدن رو به قول معروف میبندیم، در صورتی که کار و مصالح باعث میشه که مثلا مثال زدن اگه ما در یک سطح شیب‌دار یک سری مصالح رو جاری کنیم بریزیم، هر ماده‌ای به یک شکلی در میاد در نهایت و این خودش این امکان رو به ما میده که بتونیم اکسپریمنت کنیم و فضاهای جدید خلق کنیم که یک وقتای اون ابزار شاید دست ما رو ببنده و اجازه اون رو نده وقتی که ما بخوایم رو همه چیز کنترل داشته باشیم در نهایت. So this is very fascinating to me because as I translate, I have some translation notes here to remember some of the points, and I have put a cross on some words that you are doing an alternative of. So you're against, for example, you say, I don't want to predetermine everything by drawing, but I want to cast it to see how it looks like. Or against the idea of fixed architecture, I'm a fan of process or like temporality or time or how things change in time. Or for example, I'm not pro sheet or profile or all these prefixed material, but I'm pro fluid aluminum, something that is more dynamic. And I really like this notion of the fact that basically you are not thinking so much about the final product and always about this temporality, this dynamism in work. Somehow your work is always in constant changing and being. And this is something that I find different to the archaic work. Some people might say your work looks like archaic architecture or primitive architecture, but I think what is in archaic or primitive architecture is a very strong stability, like the pyramid is super stable. You can never imagine it as a fluid thing, whereas in your work, I think one of the things that makes it quite contemporary is this fluidity and this dynamic sense of it, which is super interesting to me.
Yeah, I think it's also and therefore I don't like absolute form. You know, I'm not so interested in absolute form. I find much more interested in also if there is form in all the variations within that form. You know, that there is. I find it, but for me that there is also a more philosophical understanding to it. You know, that I don't like the one ideal state. You know, I like that we can perceive reality in so many different ways, and that all these variations are equally interesting somehow. You know, and that they are that they can all be present within something, and. I would also always, you know, it would be from a political level to an architectural level. I would defend that position.
That's super interesting. Even in nature, when one might think it's the most stable thing, you go to volcano because you want to see the movement and change and how is the process, and of course the gesture of making you mentioned with Maison Margiela, but they are also doing the same thing, that they want to show the process of how it becomes, and it's not about the final thing, it's about the variations, as you put.
Yes, and then still it can be crafted with a lot of skill, you know, like the things that I show you, this, for instance, this aluminium casting is incredibly difficult to do, you know, so it took us with the foundry like a few years to figure out how to do this. So it is not that it is not. It is. There's a lot of craftsmanship, a lot of skill, a lot of innovation going on to be able to do it. But I think you showed also Stonehenge. All these things apply, you know, or the unfinished obelisk that I showed you from the Egyptians, you know, it is the principle. You can understand very easily what maybe has been done, but all the things that need to be there to be able to do it can be extremely difficult and deep in that sense. And luckily, like often I fool also, you know, the other participants within this process. So the contractor often has a feeling like it looked so simple, but it is so incredibly complicated to do. But you know, so sometimes it's maybe it could also be understood as a strategy, but it's not. It's like I just really like to get a bit in trouble, you know, in the sense that we are able to be able to discover because of that situation. Yeah.
Yeah, this is wonderful. I'm going to quickly translate. توضیح میدم در مورد این که در واقع حسی که تو کارها هست به جای اینکه بخوان استابیلیتی یا پایداری رو نشون بدن، همیشه تغییر رو نشون میدن، ورییشن رو نشون میدن و طرفدار فرم های کامل یا فرم های افلاطونی نیستن. همیشه دنبال اینن که چندین حالت همزمان رو نشون بدن و خب این سخت، مخصوصا تو پروژه هایی که خیلی وقتا همه چیز باید به شکل کاستوم طراحی بشه و قابل پیش بینی نیست. در هر مرحله میتونه مشکل پیش بیاد، ولی در واقع این چالشی که تو این کار وجود داره. Yeah, I think it's quite brave of you, especially for this large-scale project. I can imagine maybe it's easier to handle a custom design pieces for smaller buildings, but when it comes to museums, public building, large-scale, it's
yes.
Yeah, it's quite daring, and but that's what makes fascinating architecture at the end. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, it is also. I mean, it's like I look at the work as a body of work, so not as a singular project, but also in the way how we are able to develop it works through a body of work. So if we know from that museum project that we want to work with glass, you know, we want to very strongly engage with glass, we need to learn about glass, and therefore I put in other projects. We flip the specifications of it to make sure that glass now becomes a thing that we can test on small scale as well to gain this experience. So this is, you know, I work a lot. I like to work also a lot like that, and maybe that is also my engineering base that I started off this lecture with. That there is, you need to constantly approach it from very different angles to understand, to open up its possibilities, but also not to completely lose control either, you know, or to understand what it takes to be able to reach somewhere, you know. Like we were talking about tennis. You know, it's like I cannot directly go to Wimbledon and expect to win something there. No, it's like it would take a lot to bring in, and you can, you know, when you graduate as an architect, it doesn't mean yet that you can do everything. You need to be able to accumulate a set of skills that is related to that interest you have in architecture, you know, and that you build upon. So let's say we have glass and as one of our main focuses now in the work, and but we also make sure that we have a kiln ourselves that we can already test on model sizes certain possibilities that inform us to, you know, to write specifications for a project, you know. Mm-hmm. So in that, it's not a completely a process by chance. That's just what I wanted to say. It is a process where, you know, where each little step that you take within it, you can use that, you know, to reach at the end the construction, hopefully, of that museum. And what is nice also within architecture, what I find nice, is that actually it takes so many years. So that problem, you can solve that problem in these years that are to come.
Very interesting. I'm gonna translate. توضیح میدن که این موضوعاتی که تو پروژه مختلف مطرح میشه هم فقط مربوط به یک پروژه نیست، در واقع کل این بادی آف ورک مهمه، کل این گروه کارهایی که انجام میدن، اینا دانشی که در هر پروژه تولید میشه به پروژه‌های دیگه کمک میکنه و اینا از یک روند خیلی دقیق مطالعه و در واقع مهندسی در میاد تو هر پروژه‌ای برای اینکه به اون خواسته ها برسن و برای هر پروژه یک سری اسپسیفیکیشن، یک سری مشخصاتی واسه تولید مصالح تهیه میشه که این بعداً تو کارهای دیگه به کار میاد و انگار که یک دیالوگی بین اینا هست و خب زمان میبره تا در همه اینها بشه که کار جواب بده و نتیجه چیزیست که میبینیم. Okay, thank you so much for your time. We really enjoyed this lecture, and I think a lot of people attended here and also live on Apparat. And then the recording will be available to the audience. We really appreciate your patience with translation, and we are eagerly looking forward to seeing more works of you in the region, but also other parts in the world. And I think it's a great source of inspiration for the architects in Iran, and it's quite interesting to stay in touch and follow your work. Thank you again, and I hope wish you the best for the future works, but also tennis endeavors. So the next tournament for the next 35 years.
My pleasure. I hope. Hey, thank you so much, and thank you for this evening. And I hope we meet all in real also.
Yes, me too. Absolutely.
Bye.
Yana, thanks. Have a good
Bye.
evening.
Have a nice evening. Bye. Bye. Bye.
Thank you.